Hello and welcome to Profiles and Issues, the Westchester cable talk show that gives you in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. Our topic for this program, the 2019 Westchester County budget, with my special guest, Westchester County Executive George Latimer. George Latimer made political history by scoring an upset election victory on November 8, 2017, by defeating two-term incumbent Rob Astorino by a 3-1 margin, thus becoming the 9th Westchester County Executive. With that victory, the Democrats also won a supermajority on the Board of County Legislators and currently have a 13-4 advantage. When Mr. Latimer took office on January 1st of 2018, according to the New York State Comptroller's Office, he inherited a $32 million general operating fund deficit from the Astorino administration. For 2018, a projected $39 million budget shortfall, leaving a budget hole of approximately $71 billion. To deal with these challenges of 2017 and 2018, the Latimer administration and the 13 Democrats on the County Board of Legislators presented and approved a $1.94 billion budget with a 2% tax levy increase for residents. Supporters of the 2019 budget have praised the plan for being bold and innovative in its long-term approach to taking the first step to establish long-term fiscal stability by ending future borrowing from the reserve fund. Some conservative leaders, however, from the business community and Republicans on the county board have criticized the 2019 budget, calling it irresponsible for assuming that the state government will approve the one-shot deal of the transfer of the county center parking lots from one government entity to another. They are also against asking the state for additional revenue by giving the county the right to increase taxes on small businesses. They favor instead public-private partnerships to increase revenue for the county. We are honored to have back on Profiles and Issues as our Westchester County Executive, George Latimer, to present his case to you, the voters, and let you decide the credibility of the 2019 county budget. George, welcome back to Profiles and Issues. Thank you for coming on the show.
Dennis, very happy to be with you here and very happy to talk about these issues.
George, explain to the residents how the 2019 budget is the first step toward long-term fiscal stability for the county, and also why has its credit rating dropped from AAA to AA?
Well, the credit rating drop and the negative outlooks were comments made by the three major bond rating agencies on the county's financial structure up to 2017, before we took over. They were commenting on what they saw in the prior decade or so of fiscal policy. It wasn't pivoted on the budget that we presented. The budget that we presented was a responsible budget. It increased property taxes by 2%. To put that into perspective, that's a lower percentage than increased in Rockland or Putnam, both of which have GOP county executives. And the 2% is within the tax cap established by New York State and below many of the municipal budgets that were adopted at the same time. So it was a responsible number. I think some of my critics wanted to see me come in at a 6% or an 8% budget so they could say, see, Democrat, I told you so, but we didn't give them that flexibility. The budget's responsible in a number of different ways. The first thing is that we started to step back from some of the bonding for ongoing operational expenses. The most notable item that we did is pay as we go on our annual pension obligations. That amounts in this budget, we estimated to be $83 million, and that is an amount that is assessed by the state. They send us a mandated letter, and we have to pay whatever's in that letter. We estimate that to be $83 million. In past years, that money was bonded, meaning that we would borrow money, make in an annual year the debt payment on what we borrowed, and forestall for next year or next decade the actual cost of those payments. And if you've watched it, around the country, states like New Jersey and Illinois have not properly funded their pension obligations. These are commitments that have been made, rightly or wrongly. These are commitments that have been made to the employees that date back 30, 40, 50 years. And we're not in a position to just arbitrarily wave them away. So we have to pay our fair share to make sure that they're met. And those obligations in this budget we have met by cashing up on it. We talk a little bit about and I know we're going to talk in some detail, about some of the different revenues that we've obtained. And there was this issue about the parking lot. Compare that issue to the one about the airport, which was pivoted in the last two budgets by the prior administration and by the Republicans of the board. They say that they favor public-private partnership. Those public-private partnerships, Dennis, were giveaways. You take a public asset and you basically give it away to a corporation. They give you a one-year boost, and you lose control of the airport. You lose control of playland. And once you've done that, you're finished with the asset, and you still have the following year an obligation to meet. What we did with the parking lot is we made it a transfer between one element of county government to another element, so we retain control over it. And that retention of control matters to local people who use the facility. You're not going to find some outside entity raising rates on a tremendous level or changing the level of the delivery of the service. So I think what we did was highly responsible. I do think, and I've got good relationships across the aisle here in the county government and elsewhere, but I think I frustrated some of my friends on the other side of the aisle. They thought that we'd come in and wouldn't be quite so sure-footed. But I've had experience at every level of government, save the federal level, in coming in the door, and had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do. And in this first budget, I think we've given a responsible budget. One more thing to reference. The nature of some of the transactions that we had, some of the items that we did do, such as plans to sell residual parcels, the estimates of how much we're going to save with expected retirements this year. We're going to Albany to lobby in the first portion of this year. As we're doing this taping, that process hasn't fully begun yet. But over the course of January through June, we're going to be going to Albany and laying out our fiscal policy and our case before our colleagues, my former colleagues in the state legislature. And we're basically going to say is we need non-property tax revenue in order to run this government.
Yeah,
that's
a number
essential.
of questions I have.
Right. And that's essential. Oh, yeah. If we have to rely just on the property taxes to run this government, we won't be able to do it. The voters out there do not want to pay significant increases in property taxes. I understand that. That's why we had a 2%. But if you only have a 2% property tax increase every year, that's only $11 million of additional revenue to the county, and that is not sustainable. What my predecessor did in those years of zeros is he had one-shot assets. There was Austin Avenue project, 375 Executive Boulevard, what would have been the airport asset, trying to put Playland off the books. That's like burning furniture for firewood. Sooner or later, you're going to run out of furniture, and you're still going to need to keep the fire going. The more intelligent strategy is to get Albany to authorize us to have ongoing recurring revenues from a variety of different sources and let those revenues complement the property taxes. And ultimately, over the course of time, we can restrain property taxes, and yet we can run this government responsibly. So this budget was the first step on that process.
All right, let me have you covered a lot of material, so let me give a follow-up question to some of the things you covered. With regard to the bonding and and working on projects, I noticed when you took office, infrastructure, there was a decline. That Ashford Avenue Bridge in Yonkers, I take one example because I used to have friends there, and it wasn't, it wasn't worked on for a solid year at least. Has the practice changed? I was told that they used to start on projects, but then they never finished it. And has there been stability as far as county workers, whereby there would be a shortage of county workers? Give us insight as far as that goes, because I think that's where some of the economic instability is also.
Well, what you've had is deferred maintenance, and you've had deferred capital projects where things that were needed to be done 2 and 3 and 4 years ago weren't done. In not doing them, you didn't spend money, and therefore you showed some economy in the budget. But you still had the obligation to make the repairs, and they just became more expensive. I'll give you a simple everyday example. You own a home. You see a leak in the ceiling. You know you've got to go and fix the leak. If you bring a man in today, a crew in today, it might cost you $1,000 to fix the leak. But you don't spend the $1,000 this year. Your budget is balanced this year and next year and the year after that. By the time that leak starts to bring the ceiling down, when you bring someone in, it's going to cost $10,000 to fix the leak. And your economies for those years in between were phony economies. You didn't actually show what the obligations you were incurring by deferring maintenance. This year, we completed the Ashford Avenue Bridge project. We completed the boardwalk project on Playland. But there's a backlog of necessary capital projects that have to be dealt with, and those are just to make sure the bridges and the roads of Westchester County are properly maintained. Or where you have facilities like Playland, the county center, this county office building, there's still basic maintenance that has to be done and certain capital to tie with it. We're not going to deliver a bill to our children in Westchester County or grandchildren and say, pay this. Mom and Dad had a party for 10 years. We didn't spend any money in 10 years, and we consumed that as part of our happy moment. But now those bills have come due. We've borrowed for certiorari's. We borrowed for pension costs. Those bills come due. And now you have to pay for it. And of course, your time in office is limited. I have a 4-year term. 1 year is already passed as we speak today. There's no guarantee that you'll be here beyond that. And even if you are here beyond that, 8 years comes and goes like the wind. But what's most important is that you pay while you're in the job for the obligations that you have to meet. And that's what we're trying to do. Be pragmatic, solve problems today, and deal with our capital needs as they exist today.
All right. As I mentioned in my intro, some conservative members of the business community, as well as Republicans on the county board, have criticized the budget projections to increase the property tax levy by only 2% because it relies on the $22 million sale of parkland to a public utility called the Westchester Local Development Corporation, as you know, to offset the outstanding debt. Now, you this has to be approved by the state legislature. You mentioned June, so I assume you have not spoken yet to members of the state legislature or the government or the governor about whether they are willing to vote in favor of giving authority to the county.
Well, let me tell you how the process works. I served in both houses of the state legislature. The members of our delegation are all colleagues of mine that I served alongside. I have a good working relationship with the governor. So this is not aspirationally trying to get somebody to do something. This is dealing with people that I've dealt with on an ongoing basis productively over the last 15 years of my career. The legislature would have to approve any arrangement to dededicate parkland and rededicate it under these circumstances. It is not a controversial bill to pass through the state legislature. You do have to make your case. And you make your case as the legislature is back in session. A bill is filed in both houses. It's reviewed. You go and speak to the bill and you explain what the process is. The state itself has done transactions exactly like this with prisons, with roadways, and so forth. So what we're doing is absolutely precedented before. Now, the objections, and by the way, it may come from some individuals in the business community, but it was not monolithic.
I said some.
Right. I know you did, but I'm just saying some individuals in the business community might have objected to it, and I think in some cases they have an ideology and a preference for the other party. Others did not object to it. And what you really have when you get to the bottom line of this is if we can capture that non-property tax revenue that I've referred to. Look, the state is talking about sports betting. They're talking about potentially legalizing marijuana. For better or worse, there's revenue involved in that. State is talking about opening up state sales taxation to internet sales. State is talking about taking a look at our sales tax rate. We have the lowest sales tax rate amongst almost every county in the state. Lowest county in the state. We deal with money that might come from the Uber Lyft transactions. Right. We might get money that comes in the way that Rockland and Putnam does from direct support for state-owned property. All those potential revenue streams, some combination of that could allow us to not have to make that transaction for the parking lot. And I was very clear in this. I said, we need to do that if we have no other alternatives. But I'll tell you what, that parking lot transaction is a much better alternative for Westchester than selling off Playland. That parking lot is going to remain as a parking lot. We don't know what will happen to the airport or to Playland if we put it totally in the hands of a private sector entity. Now, if we want to negotiate a deal that protects the taxpayers or protects the public use of those facilities, that's one thing. But it's a completely different thing to say, here, give me $20 and I'll give you the whole shebang. That's not what we're doing with the parking lot. So I think it would, if we have to go that way, I believe we'd have the support necessary. We're going to try not to do that, and we'll have to make a decision somewhere in mid to late May if we think we're going to get other revenue or if we're going to have to do the parking lot deal such as it is.
All right, explain this to me and to the average voter. The cycle, the budget cycle for the year. If the state legislature isn't meeting till June, bills have to be paid throughout the year. And you have various moving parts working. How are you going to get all of this done on
just
time to pay the bills?
Understand that the revenue that we have coming in comes from property tax, sales tax, mortgage recording tax, a host of other activities. By the end of 2019, we need to have brought in revenue equal to $1.94 billion because we expect to have expenses equal to $1.94 billion. We have $71 million in a reserve fund. That's a very low number. If we have anywhere along the line surprise expenditures or a surprise lack of revenue, that amount of money is there to try to serve as a buffer. We hope we won't have to touch it because that's part of what contributes to the bond rating problem. Now, over the course of the year, we don't need to do every transaction on January 1st. Our cash flow does not require every dime of the revenue, $1.9 billion, to be in the bank on January 1st. Right? So we're going to be making payments, whether it's paychecks to people who work on 2-week intervals. So if we were to do the transaction in July, let's assume we get no traction in Albany on the non-property tax revenue, then we can do the transaction in July. As long as it's done by December 31st, the books for the county will balance. So we're not under any pressure until the middle of the year on this particular element because we have other sources of revenue. We receive sales tax revenue from the state on a quarterly basis, and the quarter ends at the end of March and another quarter ends at the end of June. So we'll have resources coming into us to offset our expenditures. But at the end of the day, we won't have a balanced budget if we don't get non-property tax revenue from the state and if we don't do the transaction on the land. So that's the timing element.
Does the local development corporation have to first amend its bylaws for the deal to go through? How long does this take? Is this just a procedure, or could there be possible problems?
Well, there'll be a discussion and a debate about it, but the head of the LDC is Joan McDonald, who is our director of operations. So she is the head of it, and we did not create this entity, by the way. It was created in a prior administration. So we've merely staffed it with people that are part of our administration. This is a perfectly legitimate use of the LDC function, and if there's a public debate about it, there'll be a public debate. But we believe at the end of the day, we have the ability to make this happen if we need to. And my expectation and my hope is that we won't need to do this because we'll have alternate revenue. I think what happens is this. People look for something to be critical of. We have a difficult fiscal situation, Dennis, and it's accumulated over a decade. What has happened is because we had a commitment to not bring in additional revenue from property taxes, and without seeking any additional sales tax revenue, we had a flat revenue stream. But the cost of the county rose. And in order to deliver that zero, in order to have a political statement, positive statement, that was made by my predecessor, he was planning to run for governor, being able to say that, you have to take other actions. Well, what actions do you have available to you? Well, I mentioned a few of them, the one-shot deals. When you run out of one-shots, you run out of revenue sources. So what I've argued is we need non-property tax revenue on a consistent basis. And it's not just me saying this. The 3 bond rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, primarily, Moody's and Fitch, all scored the fact that Westchester County was not having a steady and climbing revenue stream to meet these obligations. So we intend to address that. We intend to address having more money in our fund balance, eliminate the one-shots, and we believe over the course of this administration, which has 3 more years to work with, that we'll get our bond rating back up to AAA. By the way, at AA1, it's the second highest rating, and we're well ahead of most other counties in terms of our bond rating. But the downgrade is because they saw fiscal policies over 10 years that really weren't sound. We're now going to try to establish those sound policies going forward.
Has there been an appraisal on the land?
Yes.
And so that's that aspect of it.
And we think, we think this is a solid deal if we have to do it. Obviously, there are people that argued about the parkland reality of it, but the land we're talking about has been used as a parking lot for the last multiple decades, since I was a little kid and no doubt before that. So we are not doing anything other than taking a parking lot and transferring its ownership from the county government to a county-owned entity. That's all we're doing. We're not changing it. We're not building on it. We're not doing anything to destroy it. We're not taking any currently virgin parkland that people use to recreate on and turning it into anything else. So I think a lot of this is a frustration, again, I think, that comes from people who look, they supported the prior administration. They want to find ways to, come back into power. So they're looking for things to be negative about. I understand the game. I've been in it for a long time, and I understand that there's a group of people out there who want to see you fail so they can take over. But we've approached this in a very intelligent, sound way. And I think the average Westchester person says, you're not going to raise my taxes but 2%. That shows restraint. You're telling me you've got a plan to get us back to AAA bond rating. You're telling me that we're not going to sell off an asset to somebody else, but we're going to retain it. You're telling me that you're working on both sides of the aisle to do it. That sounds pretty good. That sounds like a very reasonable, moderate government. You can compare that to what's going on in Washington, D.C. anytime you want.
It's just, with regard to the taxes, what you say sounds, feasible, but it's just the general climate out there. The fact that the federal government has cut off a lot of funding. Then you have the salt tax, which is going to hit. Mm-hmm. I mean, and the state legislature wants to do a lot of additional things. Is there going to be enough money around to do all these things that everybody wants?
Well, look, I mean, the reality is most people who follow government follow headlines, and they have a certain predisposition because they're Republican or Democrat, liberal, conservative, moderate, whatever. They don't follow all the details. And I welcome anybody who wants to delve into this in some detail. Our budget's online. You can see it. You can find tapes where the Board of Legislators scrutinized every category of this budget. It's not the most compelling viewing, but it's there for people to see for themselves. But what happens is folks will look at these things from a symbolic standpoint, but they won't look at the hard specifics. In the hard specifics on all of these different things, we have a structural budget problem. It has grown over the last decade. We are tasked with doing some things that are not optional, but not everybody sees these services. We run a prison. You're going to have a prison. You're going to have a place to incarcerate people who've done bad things and they've been convicted by a court of law. And then you have a probation department, which we have to have in order to handle people once they get out of prison. They pay their debt to society, but we have to make sure that they can incorporate themselves back into society. You and I, the taxpayers who are watching this, may never be in prison. They may never have anybody that they know on probation. But you must have these services, and they're not cheap. We treat sewerage. We have 7 sewer treatment plants in this county. That sewer treatment makes sure that the Hudson River and the Long Island Sound has reasonable water quality with what we have to put out as effluent. And at the same time, you have public health because of that. We don't have an option in providing sewer treatment, and it's not cheap to do that. We have a public health department. They handle communicable diseases issues. They have public health clinics to make sure that people who don't have the money for certain vaccinations, whether it's a flu shot or something more severe, that they can find that and have that access to that. We have a social services department that's rather elaborate. We run a bus system. When people say, well, my taxes are high, yes, they're high. I understand that. But the services that we provide are necessary services. So when I offer a strategy, the strategy doesn't appeal to the way you feel. Well, they're spending too much money. I'm telling you what we spend it for. And once you understand what it's for, you say, well, these are important things too. Now the question is, how do we provide those services and not go deeper into your property tax wallet? And that's the plan that I've laid out. I could pander. I could say, and the taxes are high, and we're going to fight them, and we're going to have zeros, and ultimately drive the car off the cliff, because you cannot sustain these services. And what happens? You wind up with a fiscal review board. You have one in Nassau County. You had one in Yonkers. You had one in New York City. You make irresponsible decisions that are short-term, designed to win an election or get an applause at a rally. You have people at a rally, and you say exactly what they want to hear, and they applaud you. Go get them. But the policy underneath that isn't tenable. So I ran for this office, and I'm pretty much now pretty late in life. I got elected as the oldest county executive on the day of my election. I didn't do this because I needed to do this at this stage of my life. Truthfully, I should spend time with my grandchildren. I should kind of, ratchet it back a little bit. But I felt after my experience as a chairman of the Board of Legislators, serving in the state legislature, both houses, being a councilman, being a business person, being involved in this community in many, many different ways, that I could put together a team of people who are talented and able, and we could have the kind of leadership in this county that you need. And frankly, it's the kind of leadership that you need to have in Washington. You're not getting it there. We have to try to provide it here.
Yeah. Okay, let me clarify the point that you mentioned. I just want to clarify it for the audience, myself. Is the lobbying to increase non-property tax revenues Plan B, or do you also have to sell the parkland in order to balance the budget with only a 2% property tax increase?
Let me be clear. The 2% property tax is locked in now. That's not going to change, whatever else happens. What we do, job one, we're in Albany. We're arguing over those many different revenue streams that I've just talked about. We're trying to argue to get a combination of streams that will allow us to receive an additional $20 million, $30 million in revenue this year for the 2019 budget. If we get the support necessary and we receive $30 million of revenue, then we don't have to do the parking lot deal. The parking lot deal was costed out as a $23 million benefit to the bottom line of the county budget. Now, that doesn't have to be done if we have $30 million, and you can add it up any way you want. If we get Internet Sales Taxation Authority, that's probably about $3 million worth of benefit to us. Who knows what will happen if we legalize marijuana sales? I mean, that's an unknowable number, and the perception is there'll be a lot of people that will use that, and there'll be a lot of sales tax off of that.
How about sports betting? It looks like
sports betting may be a little harder to do. There's an issue of constitutionality in the state. It might take a constitutional amendment to allow for it, or they could allow for it at existing casinos. But the Empire City in Yonkers, which is now the MGM Grand, that is a racino attached to the racing track, not standalone. And I'm not sure if the law allows for that to happen or we need a constitutional amendment. If it is a constitutional amendment, it'll take 2 years before it can happen because it needs to be voted on by 2 consecutive legislatures and then referendum. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm not a player in any one of those different situations, but if we think that those revenue streams are going to come and we can make an honest estimate about how much that's going to represent in dollars to us, that's going to be a $5 million revenue stream. That's going to be a $4 million stream. Then we can piece this together and we can avoid having to do what we've said. But it's very important to understand the strategy that I've used has been very open. In my press conferences here, when we released the budget, I briefed both the Republican and the Democratic conference about the budget beforehand. That's never been done before. We had public hearings to get input on the budget before we finalized the budget. That's never been done before. I've stood here and done Q&A with the press on details of the budget. I've gone back and forth on Facebook with people. I've gone out to have coffee and conversation town halls in a number of communities while the budget was in play to be available for these things. That's different. This is not, the Wizard of Oz. He's behind a curtain and he's hiding, and you just hear the voice of the wizard. You don't really know what's behind the curtain.
Yeah, I saw the movie.
This has been out and open for people to see. It's very transparent, and I think that's what people want, Dennis. I think they're tired of this, magical mystery. We don't know what's actually going on stuff. And I think we're providing Westchester an opportunity to see exactly how rational, intelligent people go about making difficult decisions.
All of our programs can be seen on our website, online, at any time, at www.thedennisrudenshow.com or www.profilesandissues.com. We also broadcast on Optimum Cablevision and Verizon Fios all over Westchester County. Check your cable TV website and calendar for time, day, and channel. Also, check your weekend newspaper, the Journal News. This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Profiles and Issues.